Hi, good afternoon. This is Mikhail Drescher.
That guy is Frank.
Welcome to Digital Craftsman. Today we are going to be talking about legacy applications. That's right, the dreaded L word. Legacy systems, legacy applications, scrap them, bin them, burn them, blow them up. What the hell are you going to do with your legacy applications? Mikhail, what is a legacy application?
Typically, a legacy application is something that is unmaintained. The original provider or vendor of the software has gone bust, out of service, out of whatever. So the software is not maintained anymore, but yet you're still dependent on that. You can't just scrap it.
So let's name and shame a few legacy applications.
Lotus 123, for example.
Ooh, there's a good one. Next.
DBase.
What? DBase.
Shows you my age. But one in the financial industry is COBOL applications, or even older, PL1 on AIX machines.
COBOL can't be put into that. COBOL is like the coding equivalent of Throwback Thursday. Take COBOL off that list.
Okay.
Even though there are like, what, 8 people on the planet that know COBOL?
Okay.
Fine. So, a legacy application is something that's no longer supported or no longer used. But what if it needs to be used periodically? What if a legacy application stores data that the business may be dependent on, or there's a regulatory requirement to keep that data longer than the software is actually
That's the thing. Software,
happens.
old software is no problem when you don't need it anymore. When you need it, and when it even worse stores information in a proprietary format that you otherwise can't access anymore, then you have a problem. The equivalent to legacy software is legacy data formats or legacy data carriers, magnetic tape, or even punch cards, if anyone knows that still.
Now you're showing your age.
You know, I actually never used them by myself, but I know a lot of people who did, and they have lots of funny anecdotes around it. But the point is, if you have data that you can't otherwise access anymore, except for legacy applications, then you have a problem. And it typically feels like a big, blob of lead chained to your leg, or in more mafiosic terms, you have your feet concreted into 2 buckets. Try to walk with that. That's how legacy applications feel.
Windows XP.
So, there's a huge amount of software out there, yes, for Windows XP, even for Windows 7. Even Windows 98, you still see machines running Windows 98.
That's quite a profitable little niche skill to get Windows 98 running in a container.
That's one strategy. Actually, Windows 98 can't be run in a container because that's a different, now that either, because they have to be run in virtual machines, not in containers. Because that the architecture behind it is not known to those operating systems. They're not compatible with that, so you need to make them believe that they're running on genuine hardware on their own.
So let's talk about how this affects your business. Let's say you are migrating from an old application or an old data format to a new application that is designed to replace the much needed functionality. For example, migrating from an old customer contact solution to a SaaS-based CRM system.
Yes.
So you've got some legacy data around customers that you had 10 years ago. You've got to keep that data for tax or legal or regulatory purposes, but you've got to get the data out of the old place into the new place. You've got to be able to map old fields, old columns, old data sets into a new modern format, which often presents a great challenge.
Yes, that's very quickly why it becomes a financial decision, where you have to ask yourself, is it more costly to maintain the application? Very frequently, legacy applications actually do run fine if you can contain them appropriately, because you always have to be aware that they are not maintained anymore. There are bound to be security vulnerabilities there. So you need to make very sure that they are contained appropriately and run it that way versus actually migrating over to a new solution.
So let's consider the business logic behind this. So let's say you're an application owner within a business, you put forward the business case, you want to move to a new system, something that future-proofs that particular business unit, or a system that will set them up for the next couple of years. Is it a funding decision, or is it a business decision to say, well, the trade-off is we've got to spend a lot of money, we've got to buy new software licenses, we've got to retrain everybody, we've got to migrate the data, and that sounds like an expensive project, versus it's okay if a couple of users are pissed off with something that's perceived to be slow, even though business as usual is just fine with me. That's the kind of trade-off.
Yes, it is. It all depends on the actual area of your business, the legacy applications running. It's very often niche applications that have a very specialist function. General purpose stuff like bookkeeping or customer relationship management or stuff like that, that is a very broadly needed functionality. So for that, it almost always makes sense to migrate, because that use case, that business case for running that software is so broad that everybody needs it. So therefore there's a market for providers to innovate, to provide more functions, more functionality, close security vulnerabilities in the software, things like that, and a software as a service model. For niche applications or for old cash register systems, for example, there's often no need, there's no market for that to do so. So if you were to take the decision to migrate, then the next question is, migrate to what? Are there alternatives available? And if they're not, you'd have to pay for custom-made software, and that is expensive. So in these situations, it's very frequently a decision to encapsulate, to contain the software, make it believe it runs on its own hardware, but it actually runs on a virtual machine in certain cases. If it's physical hardware-bound software, then it has to stay somewhere, typically in your own data center or even in a cash register, stuff like that.
The analogy that we give clients is, to what extent does your calculator need to innovate, right? Calculators since 1980 have been pretty much doing the same thing.
I have my own, I don't have a tabletop, but a handheld calculator that I bought when I was in school, which is in the meantime...
Which is only...
35 years ago, but that thing, it never needed to change a battery. It's a scientific calculator. There's no need to buy a new one.
Why should I? Exactly. So this is a simple example. It's an abstraction, obviously, of where it doesn't make sense to invest in upgrading the firmware, because the improvement is negligible.
Yes.
If even present. The final point I wanted to make, and which is pretty much the bane of our day-to-day existence, it comes down to two problems. It comes down to an enterprise client with a legacy system or a legacy application that has made the decision to re-platform without really thinking about the software architecture. Like, everyone's going into the cloud, everyone's going public cloud, but the database technologies that we use, the applications that work together, have run on an on-premise solution. They've been running in the data center, or they've been running locally. And instead of re-architecting the system to be cloud native, they just find a way of shunting it into the cloud.
Which is typically one of the biggest mistakes you can make in your digital transformation.
Hence my confession that it's the bane of our day-to-day existence. How do people get around this? Is it with better deployment planning? Is it around identifying the appropriate methodology of moving to a newer type of application or a newer system? I mean, we've talked about re-platforming, we've talked about lift and shift, we've talked about the necessity to refactor code to run.
Let me stop you there, because what you're talking about is putting the cart before the horse.
Okay.
The first thing you have to, as a business, answer is actually why. Why do you need to do that? What is the actual real reason you want to do re-platforming, or you want to go to the cloud, or things like that?
Well, let's say security and scalability are the two business drivers. Let's say I've already made the decision to go ahead and update my infrastructure or update my applications. what's the best approach for me?
First of all, you need to know what actually entails moving to another platform.
Mhm.
Do you actually know what your IT estate really is?
No.
You talk about things like, the known knowns, what you have in your configuration database,
And what Colin Powell knows.
but what Colin Powell knows, but you don't know what you know if you have your Richmonds in your basement.
Yeah.
Richmond knows, but it doesn't mean that you know.
Okay, getting us back on track. Let's throw out a scenario there where you have mounting pressure on sales and marketing teams to be able to access different information about a customer in order to identify trends, in order to be able to interact with the customer and deliver a better digital experience. However, there are disparate systems. One system for billing, one for CRM, one for email, one for transactional logs. Many, many disparate systems that don't talk to each other, and therefore there's no real single record of truth. And there's no thought about API-driven development. There's no thought around connecting these different applications together. So you make the decision to call it a legacy system, throw it out the window, and consider this migration. I think this is deserving of its own episode, don't you think?
If we can put it in one episode, I think the whole topic of deciding on digital transformation and actually how to enact that, how to plan it,
God, you put
is probably a series of its own.
Long story short, if you want to talk about digital transformation, replatforming, refactoring, going cloud native, or API-driven development, and how to get away from your old legacy application, visit our website, www.digitalcraftsman.com, and we will happily have a chat with you about how to do it the right way for you.